products for the television and film industry. So my job is make sure that all the motion controllers and stuff we put out in the field actually work, do what they're supposed to do. I'm also an adjunct physics professor at what used to be called IPFW, which is the Indiana-Purdue campus in Fort Wayne, and now they've dropped the Indiana part. It's just Purdue and Fort Wayne. Oops. All right, so what got me interested in building GUIs with Python? Last year I did a project where I wanted to use a glass annealing kiln to create superconductors, so it had to heat some materials for long periods of time, and there was no good way to control that kiln. So I thought, well, you know, I've got this Raspberry Pi I had collecting dust, and I've always wanted to do something. So I decided, okay, this will be my Raspberry Pi project. And I thought, okay, well, I wanted it to have a graphical user interface to control the kiln. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can build it in Python. So my first question is, do people actually build GUIs with Python? What about here in the audience? Do we have anybody that's been coding GUIs with Python? Got a few tentative sort of half-lift arms, so a few. Well, I did some searches, and what I found is that I found this survey on, it's probably a little small to see, but opensource.com that asks that question, and they asked it 2 years ago. So the survey has been running for 2 years, and the answer is about 25% of people that responded to this survey are building GUIs for Python or for their Python application. So that's a lot more than I thought, actually. That kind of surprised me. So how did I get started? Well, of course, you have to, first of all, figure out if you're new to Python, right, there's this choice you have to make, Python2, Python3, you know, which are you going to develop with? I'm not sure why that's jumping around. Anyways, or did it just flicker? Maybe that's what yeah, it's just flickering. Okay, so, you know, for you veteran Python developers, you've probably already said, well, we're moving everything forward with Python3. And I just found this on this pythonclock.org. I thought it was kind of funny that they have a countdown. So I took this screenshot a few days ago, and the clock's ticking. So if you're new to Python, and I really ran into this problem. I was doing a Flask project, and all the tutorials I found, you know, with Google searches were Python 2.7, and I was trying to code it in Python 3, and it was a big mess, and I could never. Anyway, so for my GUI project, you know, I didn't even think about it. Python 3 the whole way. So there are a lot of ways to skin this cat, right? There are a lot of ways to build GUIs with Python, a lot more. In fact, it was a little overwhelming for me to decide, well, how am I going to do this, right? Because you don't build GUI widgets from scratch, right? We use some kind of library, right, that knows how to draw the widgets, and then we just call the library. Okay, sounds simple enough. Well, what library do I use? Well, again, there are a lot of choices. Anybody familiar with tkinter? Right, so that's probably the longest running way to build GUIs with Python. But you have to programmatically lay out the controls. So when you call tkinter function calls to draw your widgets, you have to code, in your code, you have to tell it, you know, okay, this is where I want it to appear, and this. And my background is Visual Studio. I was a C++ programmer for a long time, and I'm kind of used to tools that figure all that stuff out for us. And so I really didn't want to go that route. And there are a lot of other choices for this. There's WX Python, if any of you are familiar with WX widgets. And there is an open source WYSIWYG tool for that, but it was kind of flaky, and it just didn't work very well. And I don't know if we have any Qt programmers here. There's PyQt, very popular if you're doing cross-platform applications. I always say Qt or Qt, but I watched one of their tutorials, and all the people that work for the company say Qt, so I guess that's how you pronounce it. But again, that's a very popular option. when I tried to install their tools, it just was like, took too long, and I'm just like, I don't know, I want something simpler. So again, you got to think about where did I want to deliver this GUI, and it was going to be on Raspberry Pi. So I wanted something that was going to run easily on that, and I had seen Glade in the past, and what Glade is a user interface designer. So it lets you lay out your GUI in a WYSIWYG manner, and as it turns out, in the case of Glade, you would save your layout as an XML file, which then can be loaded into a specific library that I ended up using to build my GUI. And that library is GTK. And I'm a Linux guy, so you basically get GTK for free when you use Linux. It's on Raspberry Pi, and I'm an Ubuntu user, and it's already there. I didn't have to think about installing it or trying to figure out how to install it. So I lean towards that just because I like the GNOME desktop, and GNOME is built with GTK. If any of you are familiar with GIMP, GTK was actually the original GIMP toolkit that was built to use GIMP. So there was some history there that attracted me to go this route. So I thought, okay, I was going to develop on Raspberry Pi, using the GTK library to draw my widgets, and Glade to actually lay out the graphical user interface. So again, this is, what is GTK? But it's just a toolkit for building widgets when you're creating a user interface. Of course, you got to write this in somewhere. Editing, what editor people use is a very personal choice. And I work with people that have used VI their whole life. I mean, and they're just, what they do with it is astounding. And I edit text files with it, and that's it. Or Emacs, I worked in Massachusetts in the early 90s, and Emacs was everywhere even then, and it's still everywhere, and Emacs users love that environment. And I was on my Facebook page a year ago, I was sort of I don't know what I got this project, I don't know what editor I want to use, and of course my VI friends were like, VI and my Emacs. But what I ended up doing is, I've been paying attention to Visual Studio Code for some time. It's been out, I don't know how long, at least a year. And they frequently update it, and it is from Microsoft. And the days of, Microsoft is evolving. The days of Steve Ballmer jumping around stage, like a maniac, hating on open source, those are long gone. The new hierarchy at Microsoft is embracing open source, and Visual Studio Code is an example of that. They put out monthly builds, runs on all platforms, Windows, Mac. At work, I run it on all platforms, Windows, Mac, and I'm quite happy with it. And the only thing is, again, last summer, my project was a Raspberry Pi project. There was somebody out there in the internet doing a daily builds of Visual Studio Code for Raspberry Pi. And so I loaded those, and it was very sluggish, to the point to where it was unusable as a, if you're editing code, you don't want, the thing to be sluggish. And so in that project, I ended up using Genie, which is a very lightweight editor that you get when you install Raspbian on Raspberry Pi. Genie's right there. So for people that are new to programming into Python, you just say, I'll use Genie. It's graphical user interface, and you don't have to learn commands to use like you would. But for this project, I just wrapped up a Pygame project, and I did it all in Visual Studio Code. And so if you're just looking for something new to try, I recommend it. The last thing is, when you build a GUI, you have to think about how if you're going to distribute it, how will you? And there was a great talk yesterday on Python packaging and stuff. And I had read about PyInstaller before, and basically what it is, if in the case of my Pygame, it wasn't just a Python file. There were images and there were WAV files. And it gives you a way to package everything up into one installation program. And then you can install that. And it's cross-platform, so it'll run on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And I don't have a lot of experience in using it, so I can't say this is the greatest thing. There are other Python type installer things out there, so this isn't the only. I just wanted to mention it to make people aware that there are these things which allow you to build installation programs on any platform you're targeting, and a few searches, Google searches, you can see these kind of things. And oops, I got keep pushing the wrong thing here. Oh, we go. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you for coming. No, just kidding. That's just a dramatic pause for me to take a drink of water. Okay. Okay, so, right, so moving along here, again, we talked about Python2 or Python3. Even still, right, this is the latest Ubuntu release, 18.04, the Bionic Beaver. And, you type Python in the command line, you get Python 2.7. So, again, people that are new to Python, that confuses them. Is that the one I want to run? Right, so we still got to type Python 3, right, as most of you probably know. And we got, I didn't get out of there. There we go. Right, and from what I've read, well, at least in the case of Ubuntu, they plan to have that symbolic link point to Python 2.7 until 2020. And then in 2020, they'll switch that symbolic link, and it'll be Python 3 from then on. Right, so that's my target. The next thing is, okay, all right, this is Glade installed on here. And Glade changed recently. So with this release of Ubuntu in April of this year, I loaded up Glade, and I'm like, it doesn't look like the Glade that I used last year. And it completely changed it. So, if you go and install Glade on a Raspberry Pi, what you'll see is on the left-hand side here, you'll see like a toolbar of the various controls that you can use to create your user interface. Well, those are gone now. And they're not gone, but they're hidden. And what they've done is they've, a little hard to see on my reflecting screen, but they've moved that toolbar, all the widgets that were on the toolbar into these different categories, and you just have to click on the drop-down like this. So how do we get started, right? We've decided up front we're going to do this in Python 3, and we want to build this user interface. I'm going to use this WYSIWYG tool Glade to lay it out. So the way you get started with Glade, right, is you just choose a top-level window, which would be the GTK window, and then you can start populating that window with controls. The first thing you learn, though, when using Glade is that the GTK window will only take one control. And so my first thought was, well, I want more than just a file menu. Right? I want to populate this thing with a bunch of controls, buttons and stuff. And the way this works is that you use a container that allows multiple controls. So the first thing you have to drop into the GTK window is a container of some type. And so you would say, okay, well, I just want this, say, this GTK box. And a little hard to see here, but there we go. You can actually see better than I. You can sort of see there's divisions now. That container has 3 spaces, or 3 slots, or places where then you can drop in controls. And so the way Glade lays out its interface for you is on the left, you get a widget tree. So as you drop controls into your program, they start to show up in the widget tree on the left, and in the center is the thing you're actually working with. And then on the right-hand side are properties and events and things that you can set for your window or handle. For example, if I go up here, well, the GTK box, I only want to drop 2 controls on there. So I can go over here on the right and change that to 2. Excuse me, and I want to put a file menu in there. So I just have to, I think it's in here. I think it's just called menu bar. Yeah, there we go. So then I can take my menu bar and put it into my program. And along with that menu bar, I think I want just like a widget that will display images. So we'll go, I think is it in here? I just have to search. No, I think it's over here on display. GTK image, yeah, there it is. All right, so then I can drop in that image widget into my program. And down here in the bottom, there's a little gearbox. Let me go back up here and select the window. So right there. If I click on the gearbox, or the gears there, you can begin to take a look, preview the GUI that you're starting to lay out. And as you can see, when I first launched it, it was all kind of squashed up. And that's because I haven't specified, what size should it be when it starts. It's just picking whatever its default is. And so, so I can select that window as I have in the widget tree, and I can go over here to its properties and start to look, and I go down here and I see, oh, look, there's a default width. Right, okay, well, I want to make it 640. And there's a default height. So I go over here, and I want to make it 480. And say I just want to give it a title. We'll just call it GUI, like that. Now when we go to preview our window, we can start to see those properties take effect. And now you notice I've got those menus in there, but if you click on them, right, by default it has sort of a core set of menus that it gives you, but none of them are hooked up to anything, right? So they don't do anything. So if I click on them, nothing happens. In fact, the only thing that does happen, if I click on the X on this, it'll close the preview. Another thing is you sort of notice the image widget that I dropped in there. It really is squished down, and that's because I haven't specified a property on what it should do when it's displayed. And so I can close this out here, say go over to GTK image, and look at its properties. Now I know from using this before that the way you make it fill out the whole real estate that's presented to it is with a packing parameter, and you just tell it to expand, and then as you can see, it'll fill out all the real estate that you give it, and then when you look down in the preview, we get. So you can see, you can just start to piece together your interface. So what next? Well, right, this is great for just building something to look at, but we actually want to do something with it. And the way we do something with it is we have to write code, right, that's behind handling what the graphical user interface does. So the first mistake I made in doing, well, when I say first mistake, one of the many mistakes that I encountered is my Raspberry Pi had an older GTK version library installed than what Glade was expecting. And things just weren't working. I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, I'm sure you've all been there scouring searches, Google searches, and finally I just realized that, oh, let's look at the properties. And I saw this toolkit version required thing. And I thought, I wonder what version of the GTK library is actually installed. Because if you look, this is saying you should have a minimum of 3.20. So whatever it's laying out, for you to use, it's expecting that at least GTK version 20 is there. So we'll, how do you answer that? Well, there's a command line. It's a depackage command that I can never remember. So I just wrote a shell script for it. It's just GTK version. And it's just a simple one-line command. And it tells me version 3.22. So great. That means the GUI that I'm laying out in Glade, right, is expecting at least 3.20. And I have version 3.22 installed on my Ubuntu here. So I should be good to go. So when you save your Glade file, you get an XML file. And that's what you see here in Visual Studio Code. I actually once had to go in and edit. There was a bug in Glade, the older Glade version that you get on Raspberry Pi, and the status bar thing wasn't working right. But I was able to fix it just by editing the XML, so that was handy. And what does the code look like with Python? Again, the file that you save, this Glade file that you save, is just an XML file that specifies how your GUI is laid out. And so then you have to create a program, and it doesn't have to be Python. You can do the Glade will also work with C++, but in this case we're using Python. So what I have here is just sort of a rudimentary boilerplate program for using Glade, or a Glade file. So you have to load this GTK, you have to import this GTK library, and it took me a while to get this right because all the code samples I looked at were older than this GTK version that Glade was expecting, but finally got that right. And the main function is real simple. I just instantiate a window class, and then I just call its main function. And in the constructor, or the init function, we load the GTK builder library. That's what's going on here. And then we load from file our Glade file. And that pulls that Glade file in. And the GTK library will ingest that XML file. And then you can begin to access the widgets that you've built. In this simple program, all I do is show the main window. And let me just do that. I think I have to go to Python here. Right, so now I can just run my, GUI1.py. So I can run my program. And there it is. The Glade file that I saved, it didn't have that default window size that I set and a few other things. But now that's Python taking my Glade file and displaying it. Remember the menus aren't hooked up. So file quit doesn't work yet. I can click on the X window, it'll close that GUI. But if you look, the program didn't return. And the reason why is because when you call that GTK main function, it starts a message loop. And it's not going to exit that message loop until you tell it. Right? So it's stuck in the message loop. So at this point, there's nothing I can do but kill the terminal. And that's why I didn't launch it from Visual Studio Code, because then I would have had to kill the program as well. So how do we get around that? Well, we can go back to our Glade file. And I just have, I think I already have it over here. That was Glade 1. In Glade 2, the program's not going to shut down until you tell it. So if you click on that X, nothing's going to happen unless you control the message that the program gets to close the window. So in GTK main here, let's see, is it down? Yeah, there it is. So we have to do some code to get this thing to shut down properly. And if with Glade and the GTK library, instead of calling them events, they call them signals. And so I know that if I call the destroy signal, or I know that when I click on that X on the window, the destroy signal gets fired, and I define a corresponding message handler for that. Save that in my Glade file, and then over, say in the next version of this program that I put together, it's the same boilerplate code that I had before. The only difference now is once I load the Glade file, I call this connect signals, and what that does is it hooks up all the messages or the signals that I had defined a corresponding message handler for, and then in my Python file, all I have to do is define a function for that message handler. And see here you can see I tell it to print out some message, and then I tell the GTK library to quit. And so now I can run this, and you'll see it'll actually here, run from Python. So there's my program. So in this version in Glade, I actually gave it a default size. And now, when I click on this X function, it actually shuts down properly. Similarly, this is how you would implement menus. So again, we'll go back to our Glade function and our Glade program. I set up a GUI3 here. And in this case, let me just sort of dial in. And I think it's in here. down there. See, I've defined well, if I go here to the general, I've defined a file quit identifier, which then, when I select file quit from my menu, it's going to fire that activate signal. And so I defined a corresponding message handler for that signal. Save that, and then over in my next corresponding GUI program, again, it's the same code, I just now added a little more. This time, see, I've added in a file quit message handler, which will then destroy the window. So we can call in here. And now the file quit should work. So that's how you start to populate your menus. Similarly, any controls that you lay out that fire signals, you can write message handlers for those signals and that's how you begin to construct your GUI. So I've only got a little time left, so I need to jump ahead to the last example that I have. And that's, I'll just go through the code here real quick. Again, it's the same boilerplate program that I've shown before. This time, I load a directory of images that I have on file here. And when the program starts up, I just take one of those images and I display it in that GTK image widget that I had dropped into the Glade file. In the status bar, I put the image file name. So that's what you see down here. And then, again, this is all in the constructor or the init function of my window class. I also create a timer. And I fire that timer every 3 seconds. And I've got a corresponding message handler for that timer. So when that timer event fires, I then randomly choose one of the images from the list that I loaded, and I display it. So when the program starts up, it pulls all these images into a list, and then every 3 seconds, it randomly selects a new image to display. And I'm a big the original series Star Trek fan. So I will warn you ahead of time that the images display random pictures from classic Star Trek episodes. So we'll run it here, and there we go. After you see Kirk kissing, then you go back to the Gorn one. You think they're kissing. But, so anyways, my goal here was just to introduce people to how you can build GUIs with these specific tools, GTK and Glade. And I'm going to do a new project this winter. Do we have any train people in here? Hobby train? I just learned about DCC trains. I thought they were all still analog, but DCC is a protocol you can use to control trains on your train track, like HO or N-scale or whatever. And you can have multiple trains on a single track. You can address individual trains. You can blow their whistles. You can make them smoke. You can make them go choo, choo, choo. So I thought it'd be really fun. So you can interface your track to a Raspberry Pi. So that's my winter project this week will be to write a graphical user interface to control the train. So I've got 1 minute left, so I'll close all this out, and I'll just put up this code that I displayed. Let's see, it's, where is it? Control, there we go. Is on my GitHub, Terry Howald is my name, GitHub, Terry Howald. I created a PyOhio directory, which has all the materials I show at the talk. So thank you for coming. I hope you learned a little bit about this stuff. Feel free to talk to me if you see me wandering around.